let us all do we can to build a better future.
The migration crisis here and these migrant shelters has the makings of a powder keg that's ready to blow. And Colin, if you have any questions about me about Chicago, or you want me to pause at any time, please just feel free. But you know, the city was never prepared for this. All right. And I really feel sorry for the migrants that are here. And, you know, I've been told by some people saying, well, gee, aren't you sounding a little bit heartless by saying either, hey, they can't come here or they got to go? I'm worried because the residents, especially in the South and West Side neighborhoods of Chicago, are vocally speaking out because let's face it, before the migrants ever showed up here, the South and West Side neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and Latino have been abandoned by the city. We see gentrification, industrial polluters coming around. There's still lead in our drinking water. And if your house has a lead pipe connected to it, the city doesn't remove it. You have to pay to get that lead pipe removed. That's how asinine it is. Chicago didn't even make it on the EPA's cities that are in danger with lead in its water. So this is how bad it is. And with the migrants here now and everyone looking at this, I fear, and look, I don't want to use the word fear, but I am concerned, that's a better word, of a potential explosion taking place and tensions mounting between residents and the migrants and the violence that will follow it. Look, I know Fox News does its all, Chicago's a violent city, but if this isn't mitigated right away, there is going to be a pushback and resentment being built up. And I see a danger happening. And for the safety of everybody, as calmly and as humanely as possible, the migrants have to leave Chicago. Otherwise, there will be violence. And I know that you might have some questions about that because I have a video I want to play here. But Colin, go ahead, because it needs to be reminded to all of you that this city that I live in is a hyper segregated city, enough to make Jim Crow or Jim Crow towns in the South blush with envy, saying, oh, wow, I didn't know you guys can go that far. But that's how crazy it is. And when I talk about the Democratic machine here in Chicago, it's not progressive. It's not communist or socialist. It's corporatist through and through. And I really want to drill that home, especially to libertarians or conservatives that might want to comment on Chicago. And there's a reason why voter turnout is low. The people aren't voting for this. It's party loyalty and people connected with the machine, or either those that are hypnotized by the propaganda to vote Democrat. But when I say voter turnout's low, it is low. People in Chicago know we have a corrupt system. And it's really bad. So, Colin, I know you got some questions, so go ahead. Take it away.
I don't have any questions yet, but so what would you say is the root cause of the issues? So it's immigrants versus
the residents at this point. Okay. And I'll say what the root cause is. I've covered on this show a book called Chicago's Not Broke, where we have the TIF fund. So, 54 Chicago public schools still remain shut down. Half of our mental health facilities are shut down. Lead is in our drinking water still. We have unchecked police corruption. We have unchecked political corruption. And yes, there is a handful, just a small handful of maybe officials that do care about the residents of Chicago. But I don't want to give too much praise for the city council or anybody else because then I'm lying to myself. But the root cause is that many residents have been denied resources. They've been promised resources. They've been promised, safe streets, schools being funded, property value, people at least being able to own a home, prices going down, taxes, being lowered. There's been all these promises made. And with the migrants coming in here, what residents are seeing is a lot of money and resources going in there right away. Of course, it's being wasted.
Right. Yes.
And the thing is, too, residents are also being vocal for the concerns and safety for the migrants because some of these shelters, one shelter in particular on the south side of Chicago, was going to be built on a toxic waste site where there was heavy metals and other pollutants on there. So 2,000 people were going to be put on a site that the residents who live near that area say, what are you doing putting people on top of that? That's toxic. They didn't want them there, to be clear, but they're also saying like, hey, some kids and old people will get sick and yes, will die. And recently, just a few days, just last weekend on Sunday, a little boy died in a migrant shelter. 3 other kids got sick as well. And there's talk about smallpox, fever, and other health concerns that are happening in these migrant shelters. There is no plan. And a lot of the media here in Chicago, too, have been interviewing, and I've been seeing this as well, where the migrants, especially, let's say, some from Venezuela, for example, have said, you know what, I'm going back to Venezuela. There's nothing for me here.
Right.
And you know, now there's this rush to find shelter and safety and putting all this money into the migrants. And I get it being humane, but residents of Chicago, like, we've been living here for generations.
Right.
And it's one-sided. And I know to many people, me saying this, you know, because Harlan's Media, we are politically to the left, but it you know, when Daniel and I brought this up in 2018, early 2019, when we asked all these activists and protesters who protested in front of Trump Tower, hey, you know, is there a plan? We were ridiculed and called out being, oh, well, you're being racist or you're being an enabler to Trump. Like, no, is there a plan? Because we saw this happening where people are going to get upset, and Chicago being hyper segregated. You know, one day, you know, if you ever come here to Chicago, Colin, I want you. Okay, so have you done the Red Line trip?
What's that?
Start off on the north side on the Red Line. The Red Line goes from the north side to the south side of Chicago. Yeah. Okay, north side of Chicago. You know, it's north side got its own problems too.
Yeah,
but right off the bat, paved streets. Businesses. I remember this one small business. It'll always play in my head because I actually did this with a friend, but we drove instead of taking the train. We went back. We went past a small business called Grab and Go Taco, and there's a taco which is like running, and everyone's chasing after it because it's so delicious. You're seeing people walking, you know, being happy. Businesses are booming, and then the further you go south,
yeah.
Closed schools,
yeah.
Potholes. Seriously, I remember this one pothole in particular where it was so deep. I literally had to put on the caution light and stop a car right that was like not right behind me, but hey, heads up, there's this big old pothole. And of course, you see more police presence. You see everything just become just run down. And so it's only reasonable, even though it's horrific, that people would be upset. And I want to play this video here. But you had another question here, I think.
Not a question, but I think, yeah, it kind of clarified, you know, what's going on there. But so a couple of things. It kind of reminds me, well, the question that people should be asking is why they're looking to put this money towards immigrants. And I will say that's because that's a potential base.
Yes.
The Democrats want to kind of essentially bribe in order to say, hey, we did all of this stuff for you. You know, you can vote for us when the time comes. So it's ignoring the needs of people who have been there, who are more disenfranchised, opposing, you know, the new wave of voters, potentially Democrat, who, you know, that's essentially their new base. And I say that because as a Black immigrant, that is the situation that, you know, I think as an older and having more understanding of, you know, what African Americans have felt in terms of my group kind of coming in and being, you know, like in a lot of these circles being more favored in the sense you get the diversity, but then like, you know, generally, you know, like immigrant Black people, you know, coming from Europe or the Caribbean or, you know, other parts of Western Europe like me, you know, we're able to give a lot of these, you know, groups the diversity, but also like easier to kind of be fed into in terms of, oh, this is a new potential base. And we could say, oh, we got Black people, but they're not necessarily representative of African Americans, especially in a lot of these cities, representative of the people who have lived there forever. And so this is kind of what this is reminding me of in terms of the conversations that I'm currently having, with African Americans about how it's just kind of what we talk about in independent media is us fighting amongst ourselves instead of the true boogeyman, in our society. And so that's why I kind of asked the root, because, and again, the root cause is why these people coming here in the first place. It's the idea that a lot of these countries, again, due to our, as far as the federal level and kind of historical mandate of how the U.S. has had this imperialist mandate forever, that we've come in and fucked up their countries to the point that they feel like there is no escape, at least in America. Now, relatively, it's shit, but you are able to get somewhat paid, even though the minimum wage federal is $7 an hour, which, depending on which country you're from, is more than what they're getting in those countries.
Precisely.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So, because the thing is, like, what I've been seeing here, though, especially in this city, is prominent areas, especially on the South Side in Chicago, in which the Democrat machine has a lot of connection to. We're seeing people dismiss it or not turning up as much as they used to, because Illinois was recently reported as a state that's losing a population because of the corruption, because of so much more here. And I have a video here that, again, look, I'm going to do as much as I can, as safely as I can, because now I'm thinking about just, because I know I was sharing with the audience, like, hey, I want to cover the DNC convention, but now I'm thinking, like, okay, if I'm gonna have people with me, I want to make sure it's either, if I have to bring a person, maybe one person, and we just stick close, or is it I do it solo, because I see something happening at this convention to where it could be not like how it was in with Old Man Daley, the most infamous Chicago Democratic convention, but more of maybe on par with what we saw in Philly, maybe a little bit more intense than that, because this is happening in my city, and it is a sign of things to come. And I do hope that the city officials and politicians are realizing that a lot of Chicagoans, especially those that don't actively vote, are looking for alternatives so that they can have true representation. Because no matter what, if you run in Chicago politics, you are connected with the Democratic machine, and you could be a Republican, but you're going to be part of that Democratic machine. No matter what, the machine is going to have its final say. If you really want to know just how Chicago got the way it is, please, everyone, read the book American Pharaoh, and you'll find out about Old Man Daley. Old Man Daley, who had direct ties with the Kennedy clan. Okay, there's a long story onto that, folks, and I urge you guys, check it out when you have the chance.
How do you justify leaving the amount of people on the streets that are out here? And you're building tents, warm tents, to house 2,000 illegals? I went from tent to tent. Some of these people are veterans. How do you justify people being homeless at this rate?
We're seeing increased taxes. We're struggling to pay our mortgages. We're struggling to pay our bills. And we have thousands of dollars every month, millions of dollars, $500 million this year to support foreign nationals. And that's coming out of our pocket. It's going to people from another country, from foreign nationals. Those countries have to take care of their people. We just don't have the resources. It's nothing against them, but we just don't have it. We're struggling. This is government oppression at its finest. As a veteran myself, I just talked to a veteran in this tent right here. We're seeing people who have given their all to their country, and we just cast them out by the expressway with the trash. This is unconscionable, and it's unconstitutional. Meanwhile, we have to follow every law. We can't go over the speed limit without getting a ticket sent to our house, but people can violate federal law, and we come in and roll out the welcome mat, give them our home equity, give them our sales taxes. They get the best of our schools. Meanwhile, some like 90% of Black children are not reading, writing, and doing math proficiency but they do it all under the guise of this fake diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. We just need to do differently. We need to start pulling ourselves out of these government institutions, starting with the public school system. We need to move on from big government and from the city of Chicago's political machine.
This is taken away from American citizens. American children.
I want to pause here because I just want to add in commentary on this, and that is, I've done a lot of field reporting and, driving around the city, and my family, our roots go deep. We're 4 generations in. My great-grandfather was born in the city. My grandfather, born in the city. May they both rest in peace. My mother, born in the city. Yours truly, and my older brother, born in the city. My uncle and aunt, born in the city. So we are here. We've been here for a long time. And I have to tell you, as I drive around and I see this, I've never seen as many tent cities being set up on vacant lots or underneath bridges. I'm seeing a lot of small businesses shut down. And I'm seeing people out there on the streets. I'm seeing kids, school uniforms and backpacks on, out there on the streets with their family members asking for money. And it does take a toll on a person. And it does take a toll on somebody's mindset because you see this happening. And, we've had politicians say that they care, but they quickly dismantle the tent towns. They quickly dismantle or remove anyone that is setting up any kind of settlement around here, but people need to have a place to lay down. And unfortunately, Chicago being a major metropolitan city as it is, it, like New York City or LA, has also instituted things in which prevent homeless people from lying down. We have the money and resources to do affordable housing. Many people are out there in the streets because it's just getting that expensive here in the city, and some people just don't have the money to leave at all, period. And it is reasonable on why you see residents now coming out being vocal against the migrants here. And what I want everyone to understand is that those that were pushing Chicago to be a sanctuary city, you didn't have a plan. You did this as feel-good points and virtue signaling when Trump was president. Yeah. And shame on you for now using people as pawns, as potential new voters, because they might not be aware. Because here's the thing: let's say the migrants still remain here and they become integrated into the city. Trying to do on by as best they can. They might not be aware of just how insidious this machine is and what they're expecting in return for maybe their settlement, because the machine always wants something. And I can't stress this out enough. The Democratic machine here in Chicago is not some socialist utopia thing. It is corporatist. It demands loyalty, and it's put together pretty well. There's been some cracks in it here and there, and maybe the people speaking out could be just that thing to maybe break it apart. But I see a powder keg happening, and I hope I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But this is just a recipe for disaster when Chicagoans who've been living here for generations have been ignored. Colin.
I mean, people in the chat are saying this, and your audience is very insightful. How different is this compared to what's happening in Israel, Palestine?
Oh, okay. Hang on. Oh, I'm glad we're talking about this. Let's talk about gentrification. So I'm going to talk about one neighborhood. I'm going to talk about actually a couple of neighborhoods in Pacific. First of all, let's talk about Pilsen. Pilsen is a neighborhood that's being gentrified. It still is to this day. 10,000 people have been displaced from there. 10,000 people have been living there for generations, okay? When Hardlens Media got started, when we had a Galaxy S7 cell phone, I remember this location called Casa Aslan. Casa Aslan was a place where migrants, who came here legally, would have a chance to get themselves set up or back on their feet. Or either that residents who were in trouble, let's say they need to get back on their feet. Casa Aslan was a place in which you could rest your head and get back on your feet, and boom, out the doors, you're ready to contribute. And Casa Aslan can bring in the next poor soul that needs to get back on their feet. Well, Casa Aslan was bought in by a private business, and it was turned into a place where, hey, a $2,000 condo apartment or more. And I will never forget this, setting up this live stream. It almost was like something from Black Mirror. A big double-decker bus comes in here, and it's passing by, and it's looking at all of us. And the people, the tourists up there, almost look like they were on safari. on the south side of Chicago. So people want to talk about Israel and Palestine. It's been happening even long before the migrants were coming in here, when you had generations of families living here. The tearing down of the projects. You have the what's happening on South Austin, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood that's happening, gentrification and property values, going down. You have large industrial polluters being set up, in which it is almost impossible for someone to have, a good, clean bill of health without being exposed to, air particles or other contaminants. So it is an insidious two-pronged strategy of gentrification, industrial pollution, schools being shut down. And when a school gets shut down, that's a death blow to a community. That's like dropping a bomb. Right. When that school is shut down, property values go down, everything. That's like ripping out the heart out of the body, and the body cannot function without a heart. And then, of course, there's the lead in our drinking water. So to the audience, you're asking about how is this similar? This is something that Chicago has been dealing with for some time. And we've talked about it early on here at Hard Lens Media. And it is something I am horrifically familiar with. And the city government has done nothing to stop it, from Daley Jr., Rahm Emanuel, Lori Lightfoot, and now Brandon Johnson.
Right. I mean, but I'm actually glad that I'm here for this segment, because, I can kind of speak to that in terms of my personal experience, again, being an immigrant. Mm-hmm. And, for me personally, and obviously when you're growing up, like, you don't know a lot of the history, surrounding a lot of these neighborhoods, that you may not understand why people might be resentful of you, especially when you might be getting a lot of these socialist programs in your favor versus them who have been living here forever. Like, you may not have, for me as a child, I didn't understand truly how privileged I was. But then as I got older, and I think especially being in independent media, having a better understanding as to, it's because, as you said, and as I said, it's the idea of giving the Democratic Party the cover of diversity, but also as a potential voter, and kind of almost a sucker to the establishment, that it gives them that cover, and not having to deal with the issues that I'll speak for African Americans have talked about, for issues such as reparations and like a lot of these other universal programs that they've been the lead in this country of pushing for those issues, and It hasn't happened for those populations in particular. So for me, I have to be extremely careful and understanding of, their struggle. But also, I think, to speak to them, especially to, the ADOS and FBA movements, how this all ties back to imperialism at the end of the day. And I think those are conversations that we're not necessarily having. It's in terms of like how a lot of these people who are coming from these countries, who are wanting to come here, and we have to ask, well, why are they so desperate to be willing to come to this country in the first place, is, again, if you look at the history, it's in terms of how the establishment in the West have infiltrated a lot of those countries in Africa and in the Caribbean, and have subjected to devastation that for many people, they do not have that choice in order to feel like they have to come here to have somewhat of a better life. So it's very cyclical. It's all tied back to the establishment. And so I think I'm actually glad that you are speaking on this, because it kind of builds upon this thesis that what we're saying in independent media, that it all comes back to imperialism and colonialism.
Yep,
at the end of the day.
Exactly. And there's a reason why migrants are coming here, because of previous Democratic and Republican presidential administration policies in Central and South America, the war on drugs, which is just like Prohibition. During Prohibition, who was buying the booze? Mr. and Mrs. America. War on drugs. Who's doing the drugs? Mr. and Mrs. America. Who's responsible for the opioid crisis? Big Pharma. Big Pharma's responsible for the opioid crisis and the painkillers that come with it. and also the sanctions, the coups, the regime change wars, all that horrific stuff. And of course, if you're a person living in these areas in which there are warlords or tyrants or gangs or bosses or anything of that nature that use violence as their first and second and third language, you're going to want to get up out of there. I don't care who you are. Yeah, I would run. I would run as far away. It's like, okay, I'm out of my element. I don't want to be involved in this, and I want to run away. And then here we are with this crisis. And so I'm glad we are having this conversation, because the thing is, I want to be clear here. I don't want any, just like when Trump was saying at CNN, even though I don't know how sincere he's going to be about it, about the war in Russia and Ukraine, I want people to stop dying. I don't want anyone to get hurt. And I see resentment being built up. Chicagoans have a long memory. Chicagoans are pretty bitter with our political system. Voter turnout is never high here when it comes down to the city elections. And so people know what's going on. And I fear and am concerned with the safety of everyone.
Right.
And as the convention gets closer here, I don't think the Democrats realize what kind of minefield they're putting their boat into, where they're deploying themselves at, because this city, while it is a Democratic bastion, the people have another thing to say altogether. And I see this as something horrific and potentially playing out in which there could be more violence. And I just hope that for everyone's sake, clearer minds do prevail, and that people are safe. That's the one thing I have to say.
Yeah, but it's the idea of the violence against whom?
Yeah.
Like, if it's against the Democratic Party, I'm not saying anything, but I rather have it be against the establishment versus each other. And I feel like
exactly.
But what I see, or potentially, is a lot of this discontent between Chicagoans who have lived there and immigrants. And that's going to come to a head. And that's what the party is going to feed off of. That's what the establishment is going to feed off of, in terms of, we are fighting each other versus fighting the establishment. And that's where we need to kind of get to. And that's why I feel it's especially important, especially, for African American. If you're Black and like African American and Black immigrant, especially, and I'm just speaking in terms of my community, this is why we need to have these discussions. Is because if we're able to have these discussions, we kind of will have the understanding of, oh, this is why shit is happening to us in the same way that it's happening to you. And we need to collaborate and figure out how we're going to attack, the true boogeyman out of all of this. And I know people in the chat, this is why we have to have that coalition among the working class, regardless of where you come from. Because again, immigrants are going through the same issues in a similar way as, the locals, in the area. And if you want to look at Israel and Palestine as your context, this is why, even for them, this is why they need to have those conversations. Like, Israelis really need to make sure, and I say this, online, like, to all the Israelis who are stomping out for Israel, it's like, well, have you spoken to a Palestinian and an Arab for their perspective? And hear them and see them. So you have a better understanding of why they are angry. And why, as you said earlier, they're being radicalized to hate you. Like, and conversely, why you are kind of radicalized to hate them. Yeah. This is really nothing to do with either one of you two. This is more, again, the establishment wanting to boost up that anger for their benefit and ultimately your destruction. So,
precisely. Spot on.
So I think we need to really have those conversations, and that should be an ongoing conversation past 2024, because regardless of who is in office or not, people are still going to be struggling. Immigrants are still going to come here, and that sentiment is just going to continue to fester. So I think it's especially important that we start having these conversations, and I think independent media is a great vehicle to have those conversations. So we can start having that understanding, but being challenged as to, okay, what are we going to do about it on a local level so that we're more unified? And that way we're really targeting the true enemy here. It's not each other. And
true. And I just want everyone to know, like, look, there are a lot of good people trying to help out in the city of Chicago. It's just, I guess maybe it's because I'm just so, I've been seeing the utter hypocrisy of our political system for so long. I just want everyone to realize that this is what the establishment and the system wants. It does want us at each other's throats. And I just think that, for all those maybe who had good intentions for sanctuary cities, if you ever see these politicians promoting something, you need to ask yourself, who is promoting it? What is their track record? Why are they so hard on promoting it? And why, what is their incentive? And is there a plan? Because all these politicians talk this game for virtue signaling. And I get that, of course, people are triggered by Trump, but I want everyone to understand this. Trump isn't the problem. And Trump, he has a history. He has his history, but he's like the cartoon mustache twirling villain, right? I see him coming a mile away. At least he's been up front with his BS, and that's not saying much. But sometimes the greatest evil can hide in the light. There are people in power. There are politicians who don't even believe in anything that they say, but they know that if they can lie to the people, that people will follow them en masse. And I want everyone to realize that before you follow a slogan or an idea, really look into it and ask yourself, is there a plan? And so for my fellow Chicagoans, I don't know how 2024 will play out, especially when the convention comes here to our backyard, but Hardlands Media will be there to cover it. And I'll be sure to duck, dodge, dip, dive, and dodge in case anything decides to pop off. I don't think it will. Maybe that's a little bit of an over exaggeration, but folks, Chicagoans are upset. And I think 2024 is going to be a very interesting year for this city. So stay tuned to Hardlands Media.